I knew exactly what I was doing when I nodded. My name is Leonard Holt. I'm 63 years old. I have a bad knee, a good dog, and more money than most people would guess from looking at me. I drive a 2009 Silverado with a crack in the passenger side mirror. I wear the same 3 flannels in rotation from October through April. My idea of a perfect Saturday is fishing the creek behind my property with a thermos of black coffee and nothing particular to think about. I mention all of this because it matters. The kind of man people think I am that matters too. Her name was Diane Aldrich when I met her. She became Diane Holt 3 years ago in a small ceremony at the courthouse in Ashford County, Tennessee. 42 guests. Her sister flew in from Portland. My son Marcus drove down from Cincinnati with his wife and the kids. We had barbecue afterward at Dunn's Smokehouse, and people danced in the parking lot until 9 o'clock, and I thought to myself that evening I really did think this. I am the luckiest man I know. Diane was 51 when we married. She was the regional director of operations for a logistics company called Hargrove Distribution. She had a company car, an expense account, and a direct line to the CEO's office. She wore blazers that cost more than my monthly grocery bill, and she moved through rooms the way certain people do, like the room had been waiting for her. I was a retired land surveyor. At least, that's what she believed. What I actually was, what I had been quietly building since I was 26 years old, was something considerably different. But I'll get to that. Diane and I met through her cousin Gerald, who had done some hunting on a parcel of land I owned outside of Cookville. Gerald is a good man, the kind who actually listens when you talk to him. And one evening after we'd sat on the tailgate watching the sun go down over the ridge, he said, "My cousin Diane could use someone like you in her life. She works too hard and laughs too little." He said it the way you'd say something true and simple, and I thought about it for a week before I called her. We dated for 14 months before I proposed. Real dating dinners, Sunday drives, long phone calls that went past midnight even when we both had early mornings. She told me once that she hadn't expected to feel this way about someone who was, in her words, this uncomplicated. She meant it kindly. I took it kindly. What she meant was, "You don't have ambition, Leonard. You don't have hunger. You are a simple, comfortable, undemanding man, and that's fine." I nodded when she said it. I have a talent for nodding. The first year of our marriage was good. Better than good, honestly. We settled into a rhythm. She traveled for work 3 weeks out of 4. I kept the house, tended the property, took her calls in the evenings, and always had something warm on the stove when she came home. We had a standing Saturday morning routine. She'd make coffee, I'd make eggs, we'd sit on the back porch, and she'd decompress from the week. I was happy. I believe she was, too, in her way. The second year was different. I didn't see it happening in one moment. It was more like watching a season change, gradual, almost imperceptible, until one morning you realize the light is different and the leaves are gone and you can't say exactly when it happened. She started taking calls during dinner. She stopped asking about my week. She came home later and later, and when she did come home, she was already somewhere else, mentally working through logistics chains or personnel decisions or quarterly reviews in her head, and I was just the furniture of the life she returned to between the parts that mattered to her. My friend Warren noticed before I did. Warren's been my closest friend for 31 years. We met on a job site in '94, and we've been talking most weeks ever since. He's blunt in the way that only a real friend can be, and one afternoon over coffee at his place he looked at me and said, "Leonard, something's going on with that woman. You know it. I know it. Don't let yourself go soft just because you love her." I told him to mind his business. He told me that was fair, and then he said it one more time anyway, because that's Warren. I should have listened. I did listen. Actually, I just wasn't ready to do anything with what I heard. The shift became undeniable in the 3rd year. She was promoted to Vice President of National Operations. It was a significant leap, more responsibility, more travel, considerably more money. I was genuinely proud of her. I told her so. I took her to the nicest restaurant in Ashford County to celebrate, and she smiled across the table at me with something I can only describe as an evaluation. Not affection, an evaluation. She started talking about her colleagues differently. There was a man named Barrett who came up in conversation more than once, a senior director from the Atlanta office, young, polished, the kind of man who owns his blazers the way Diane owned hers. I noticed. I didn't say anything, but I noticed. The night it finally broke open was a Tuesday in March. Cold rain, mud on the roads, the kind of evening I would normally have spent reading by the fire. She came home at 11. She was steady, composed, not nervous, and that composure told me more than nervousness would have. Nervous people are surprised by confrontation. She wasn't surprised by anything. She set her bag down on the dining room table. She poured herself a glass of water, and then she sat down across from me and said, "I want to talk to you about something and I need you to hear me out before you respond." I said, "All right." She said she had been thinking about the structure of our marriage, about what was fair and what was sustainable given where her career was going. She said she had worked with her attorney to draw up a postnuptial agreement that would formalize the financial arrangement between us, separating her assets, protecting her retirement accounts and equity in the company's stock plan, and establishing a defined settlement structure if the marriage were to end. She slid a document across the table. I looked at it for a moment. 31 pages. Her attorney's letterhead, embossed, official. I looked up at her. She said, "I think it's just smart planning, Leonard. I've built a lot, and I need to protect it. I hope you understand." I picked up the document. I read through the executive summary on the first 2 pages. I set it back down, and I nodded. I said, "You're right. Smart planning." She blinked. I think she had expected an argument. Maybe tears. Maybe the kind of wounded silence that would have confirmed for her that I was exactly the simple, uncomplicated man she believed I was. Instead, I said, "Let me have my attorney look it over. I'll get back to you by end of week." She nodded slowly. She said, "Of course." She went to bed. I sat by the fire. I was not crying. I was not panicking. I was doing something I have done my entire adult life in moments that matter. I was thinking carefully, and thinking quietly, and thinking several steps ahead. Let me tell you about the Leonard Holt that Diane Aldrich married, the one she never fully looked at. My father was a stubborn, brilliant man who owned 340 acres of timberland in Cumberland County and refused to sell it his entire life, no matter what anyone offered him. When he died, he left it to me. That was 1991. I was 26. I didn't sell it either. What I did was educate myself. I spent the better part of a decade learning land law, mineral rights, conservation easements, timber contracts, and rural real estate. I made quiet decisions. I reinvested returns. I bought adjoining parcels when the opportunity arose. I was never flashy about it. I didn't talk about it at dinner parties. I didn't put it in my email signature. By the time I met Diane, I held title directly or through LLCs to just over 2,400 acres across 4 counties in Tennessee and Kentucky. I had a consulting agreement with an energy company that paid me a retainer for access rights on one parcel. I had a long-term timber contract on another. I had 2 properties under conservation easement that generated annual payments. I had a financial portfolio that my advisor Marcus Chen had been managing since 2003, invested across index funds, private equity, and municipal bonds. My retired surveyor income was real. It was also roughly 4% of my actual annual income. I had never lied to Diane. I had never told her I was something I wasn't, but I had answered her questions honestly and not volunteered information she hadn't asked for. She had assumed, people do, when a man drives a Silverado and wears flannel. I called my attorney the next morning, Tom Breck, who has been handling my affairs for 22 years and who knows the full picture. I told him what had happened. I told him I needed him to review the document she had presented and prepare a counter-agreement that accurately reflected my financial position. Tom was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Leonard, does she know?" I said, "No." Another pause. "Well," he said, "she's about to." Tom spent the following week with his team doing a full disclosure document. Total asset valuation, land holdings with county records, portfolio summary, income streams, the retainer agreements, all of it. Everything above board, everything documented, everything legal. The counter-agreement he drafted proposed a mutual postnuptial that protected both parties' separate assets, equally mine and hers, based on full and honest disclosure. The disclosure packet that accompanied it ran 68 pages. Her attorney's name was Patricia Weld, out of Nashville. Tom sent the package to Patricia Weld on a Thursday morning, certified mail, and digital delivery. I want to tell you about Friday afternoon, because I think about it sometimes. I was out on the back property, checking the fence line along the eastern edge of the timber parcel that adjoins my house. Cold day, clear sky, the kind of afternoon where you can hear everything for half a mile in any direction. My phone buzzed. It was Tom. He said, "Patricia Weld just called me." I said, "I figured she would." He said, "She asked me," and I'm quoting here, "she asked me, 'Is this real?' I said it was real." Tom said, "Leonard, their postnup was designed to protect approximately $1.4 million in Diane's assets. Your disclosure puts you at a current conservative valuation of just over $14 million. I didn't say anything for a moment. Tom said, "She played herself, my friend." I thanked him and hung up. I stood there with my hand on the fence post, and I looked out at the timber, my father's timber, my timber, and I felt something I don't have a clean word for. It wasn't satisfaction exactly. It was more like grief that had found its proper shape. Diane called me that evening. She didn't come home early. She didn't stop by. She called. Her voice was different. The composure was still there. Diane was too disciplined to lose her composure entirely, but underneath it something had shifted. It was like listening to someone who'd been walking confidently across a floor and just discovered the floor was glass. She said, "Leonard, I need to ask you something." I said, "All right." She said, "Patricia called me today." She said, a pause. She said, "The counter-disclosure your attorney sent." Another pause. "Is it accurate?" I said, "It is." She was quiet for a long time. So long that I checked once to see if the call had dropped. Then she said, "How?" I told her about my father's land. I told her about 37 years of quiet decisions. I told her about Tom Breck and Marcus Chen and the timber contracts and the conservation easements. I didn't tell it dramatically. I just told it the way it happened, the way I would tell anyone anything, steadily and without embellishment. When I finished, she said, "Why didn't you tell me?" That was the question I had been waiting for. Not from anger, not to wound her. I had simply been waiting to answer it honestly. I said, "Diane, you never asked. You decided what I was the day you met me, and you never looked past it. I answered everything you asked me directly and truthfully. You just didn't ask much," she said. "I didn't think I needed to." I said, "I know." I think that was the moment she finally understood. Not the money. The money was just the surface of it. What she understood, I think, is that she had spent 3 years living next to a person she had never truly tried to know. She had taken the flannel and the old truck and the quiet evenings as a complete picture, and she had been completely wrong, and she had never even been curious enough to notice. We sat in that silence for another few minutes. Then I said, "I think we need to talk about what comes next." She agreed. What came next was a fair and legally clean dissolution of our marriage. Tom and Patricia worked together professionally. Diane kept her assets, her equity, her retirement accounts, everything the original Postnup had sought to protect, she protected. I signed over nothing I had built. We did not fight. We did not involve the courts beyond the necessary paperwork. The day we signed the final documents, Diane looked at me across the conference table in Tom's office and said, "I'm sorry, Leonard, for underestimating you." I said, "I'm sorry too, for different reasons." I meant it. I was sorry the woman I'd married hadn't been the woman I thought she was. I was sorry the Saturday mornings on the porch had become what they became. I was sorry that a man can love someone genuinely and still not truly know them, and that the reverse is true too. I drove home in the Silverado. I took the long way, through the back roads, past the old timber on the ridge, past the creek where I fish in the early mornings. It was May. Everything was green and loud with birds. My dog Hank was waiting at the front gate, the way he always is. I scratched his ears and told him it was just the two of us for a while. He wagged his tail. He has never once underestimated me. Warren called that evening. I told him how it had gone. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I told you something was going on with that woman." I said, "You did." He said, "Did you listen?" I said, "Not soon enough." He said, "Well, you listened eventually. That's the thing about getting to 63, friends. You stop needing to announce who you are. You stop needing to impress anyone. You stop trying to perform competence or ambition or worth in ways other people can easily read. You build what you build. You know what you know. You let people draw their own conclusions about the flannel shirt and the cracked mirror, and you discover fairly quickly which people are curious enough to ask the next question, and which people have already decided the answer. The people worth keeping in your life are the ones who keep asking. Diane stopped asking somewhere in year 2. Maybe she never really started. I don't tell this story with anger. I've told it to my son Marcus, who listened carefully and then said, "Dad, why didn't you just tell her?" And I told him the same thing I'll tell you because I wanted to be known, not cataloged. I wanted someone to wonder about me, not Google me. I wanted the ordinary kindness of being with a person who saw something worth looking at before they knew the acreage. I am 63 years old. I have a bad knee, a good dog, and 2,400 acres of some of the most quietly beautiful land in Cumberland County. I drive a 2009 Silverado. I wear flannel from October through April, and I never said a word that wasn't true. What Diane asked me to sign was a document designed to protect her from a man she had already decided was beneath her. What she got instead was a full and honest accounting of who I actually was, something she could have had for free any morning on the back porch over coffee. She tried to protect her future. She never stopped to ask about mine. I still fish the creek behind my property on Saturday mornings. The coffee is still black. The mornings are still quiet. And the land my father gave me, every acre of it is still exactly where it's always been. Some things, friends, you never have to fight for. You just have to have been wise enough all along not to give them away.